Roll for Crit is made possible thanks to the support of viewers like you and our patrons on our Patreon page.
You can become a patron for just $1 a month at patreon.com/rollforcrit.
Roll for Crit here with the coolest, most awesomest, bestest review of Leaders Fort, the new deck building game in which you play as kids building forts. You'll be using your best friends as well as recruiting other friends to help you make the coolest fort, but be warned, your friends may be attracted to other forts because they seem pretty nifty too.
Each player is going to have their own deck of cards. You'll start with 2 best friend cards that are fixed, determined by your character. Then you will get 8 additional cards, either dealt randomly or you could draft them amongst all the players at the start of the game. On your turn, you're going to choose a card from your hand and play just one of them, but on that card there are 2 different actions usually, and you can choose to take either just one or both of them. One of them is a private action, so only on your turn the player who is playing that card gets to do it. The other one is a public action. Other players will have the opportunity to follow it. We'll get into how that works in a second. You'll also have the chance to play additional cards of the matching suit if the action listed on that card calls for it. So it might say that you get a certain amount of resources or points for each card of the skateboard suit or the squirt gun suit. And if you have more of those in your hand, you can add them to increase its effect. You might also have cards in your lookout. That's a secondary area underneath your board, and some cards will let you add things to that spot. You won't be able to use the effects of those cards, but you will have their symbols for use in situations like I just mentioned. Based on the card's action, you may receive resources, which are pizza or toys. You might be able to move those resources into your pack, copy things between your pack and your stuff, maybe even copy the packs of other players. Once you've finished carrying out the actions on your card, then other players have the chance to take on the public action. If they want to use it, they have to spend a card from their hand of a matching suit, and they also must carry it out fully. So if there's any way to partially carry out an action, they can't do it. For example, if they didn't have enough room in their stuff for the full amount of pizza that the card would give them, they must choose to decline. Once you're done carrying out that action card, you will discard it along with anything else that you use to augment it during your turn. Then you have the opportunity to recruit a new card. Now you can take a new card from the face-up park cards and add that to your discard pile to be shuffled into your deck on a future turn. Or you can look at other players' yards. Cards from your hand that you didn't play or that weren't your best friend starting cards will go into your yard area at the end of your turn. And from that point on, other players can choose to recruit cards from those areas of other players. So something that you choose not to play might not be yours on a future round. Someone else can take it. So you have to be careful and decide what's worth keeping in your hand and what's worth risking that you might lose to someone else.
Now, this game is called Fort, so it's important that you keep an eye on your fort. Your fort will have different levels, and as it grows, not only can you hold more cards in your backpack and as well as in the lookout, but you will unlock some other perks. The first one you're going to unlock is the secret rule. Now, at the start of the game, there's going to be a number of secret rules equal to the player count plus 1, but they will be face down. If you are the first one to unlock that level, you'll get to look at all of them, pick one, and put it aside face down. That is sort of like a secret goal for you to get extra points at the end of the game. Then, of course, as other people reach that level, they too will be able to grab that, and they'll have less options and also options that you already know. So that's a way for you to maybe try to strategize and prevent them from getting some of those goals. The next, though, are perks. These will be face up at the beginning of the game, same number, and they'll usually have either like a constant goal, like your backpack is increased by a solid 2 for the rest of the game, or maybe discard this to be able to play a second card on your turn. These actions will help really boost you and maybe go in a unique style, or maybe give you that one extra push you needed on turn to get those final points. Now, if you can get your fort all the way to the top level of 5, then you have triggered an end of game. Now, if you are first, you will receive the macaroni sculpture because you were the first one to make that amazing fort that no one else could dream of having. So that's an extra 4 points. Now, after that, everyone's going to make sure they have a number of turns, so everyone has the same number of turns. So if you were first, everyone will get last turn. If you're last to go, then the game is over. This is not the only way, though. You can trigger end of game. There's a score sheet, and there are cards that will give you victory points as you play. Should someone hit 25, that will also trigger end of game, and same thing goes. You make sure everyone has the same number of turns. Or if the deck entering into the park runs out, then that is the other way the game can end.
This game was designed by Grant Rodiak, and it is a re-implementation of another design he had from a couple years ago called SPQF, which I believe is ancient Greece themed. Hadn't played it, but I definitely think that giving it this fresh coat of paint and this much more playful, colorful art style is an improvement and will make it more marketable. It's got the same artist who did Root, Kyle Farron, so that's a huge plus. We love the art from Root. There's a lot of funny stuff with different kids, and they also all have funny names, and they're doing things like eating pizza or playing with their toys, things that children do, I'm told. So that part of it is fun.
The game mechanics themselves, though, are actually really cool. Now, it is a deck builder, but unlike a lot of other deck builders, the big example I know that came up, example of DC deck building, if someone gets super strength or laser vision, like really early on, it's just like, well, he got the good card. That's it. In this, because you can't play your entire hand, you just play one in maybe some similar suits. If you don't play your other good cards, they go into the yard, and then someone else is like, well, that's pretty nice. I'll take it. So that changes things up a bit, because then you're planning not just of what do you want to do in your turn, what do I want to do to make sure I also don't give something away? Because in one game, for example, the build cards, as we accidentally destroyed the basic cards that allowed you to upgrade our fort, were very limited in supply. So it became this really close match of making sure you either played the card, whether you could build with the resources or not, or you found a way to discard it because you needed more book symbols or something to make sure your opponents did not get that card.
Yeah, it's really a fascinating twist on the genre. The fact that your lineup comes from not just a common lineup, but all other players. And like you said, trying to figure out, I don't want to play this card this turn, but I also don't want anyone else to take it from me. Or maybe I only have room for one more pizza or whatever it is, but I'm still going to play extra squirt gun symbols for this card, because you can do that even if you don't use them, just so you've technically played that card and no one else has the opportunity to take it. So some turns you might only be putting like one card into your yard. Sometimes you might be putting 4 cards into your yard. So there's a lot more options for people to take from. You can also take a card just from the top of the deck blindly if there's really nothing for you to take from. But especially if you have like at least 3 players, the game goes up to 4. Probably it's more likely you're going to want to, you still are trying to build your deck in a way that you keep the suits relatively consistent, because, of course, that will benefit you. Also, the choice of when to add something to your lookout. Is this better as an action, or is it better to have that out permanently? And a big factor of this that I found, both of us found, but I particularly ran into it, is that your decks will be much smaller than a typical deck building game.
Oh, yeah.
Because not only are you gaining a card every turn, you're probably gonna lose at least one card every turn. So your deck never gets bigger, which means there isn't really a need. You can trash cards in this game, that is a mechanic, but it's not nearly as much of a thing as in most deck building games.
Well, in other deck building games, whether it be the 2 big ones we play is DC and Marvel, that you have starting cards, which usually by the end of the game you really don't want. Your only starting cards are your 2 best friends, and for the most part, they're pretty solid. The rest of your starting deck is actually be cards from the main deck. So you're always playing with cards that usually have something good at some time. And then, of course, things can change up depending on the perks and secret goals. It is really fun to be the first one to make it there so you can get the good one. And when it comes to the secret rules, to look at them and be like, okay, I see what's available right now. I'm going to take this one, but I know there's one that wants the reward of getting the most crowns. So if I see someone collecting crowns, I'm going to try to take those from him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they definitely added an interesting extra twist to it, so your strategies will diverge a little bit. Going for that fort is definitely a big one. You will get a lot of points, and you'll end the game if you reach level 5. So that's usually in your favor to do. But depending on, which cards you get, which things come out, there are other ways that you could make some pretty nice engines to earn points during the game as well. I think a lot of that depends on player count somewhat, and again, just what comes out of the deck. There aren't a ton of cards. It's actually the game's got a pretty light footprint in terms of how much space it takes up, and the size of the box is pretty small, which I like because there's not a whole lot to overwhelm you. You'll kind of lock into what symbols do what and which engines are good early on. Again, compared to most other deck building games, I think it's very streamlined in that sense, while still feeling pretty deep and, to me, relatively complex in a good way.
I mean, I think thematically it's fun and light, just like with Root. The game mechanics are definitely stand out apart from other deck building games. And like you said, also the size, the fact that it won't take up, a quarter of your shelf or something, is definitely to give it a lot more points. I think it just has a lot of great things going for it. Crits and misses for Fort.
Crits. This is a really creative take on deck building. The fact that you are swapping cards with other players from turn to turn makes it feel very different from other games in the genre.
We've played plenty of other deck building games, and this one definitely stands out from the rest.
Aside from your two best friends, you're not watered down with a bunch of starter cards. Your deck will end up being smaller and leaner, and your strategy, therefore, can be tighter and more efficient.
If you follow the drafting rules, it becomes exciting to see what cards people are drafting and what symbols they're going for. You don't have to deal with those starter punches or agents. You can go straight into the good stuff.
There are ways to go after your opponents, whether it be recruiting kids from their yards that they wanted, or choosing how to play certain actions at the right time so that other players can't get the best benefit from it. But because it's all based on players' decisions, none of it feels too take that heavy, and no one feels too punished after a game is over.
Even if someone does take that card you really needed, odds are there's a good chance you'll be able to grab it back or something similar later on. Misses. This is one of those games that uses only iconography to spell out on the cards, and there are a lot of weird symbols. It can be a little confusing to remember which one exactly means taking versus just moving a resource. The reference card itself is actually bigger than your own board.
Even with a few games under your belt, looking around at the table at all the possible cards you can recruit and trying to read all the little icons on them can be intimidating.
Like any deck building game, when there is a lineup you can buy from, it's disappointing when the park becomes stale. We notice this tend to happen more often in a two-player game when we were pretty happy with what cards we had or what our opponents had, and no one was really showing off new cards in the park.
I found myself wishing there were an option to spend some resources to clear the cards in the park to get a whole new lineup. While you can take cards from the top of the deck, that's really just a grab bag and you might not get something that you like, so the park can end up just sitting there not helping anybody.
We were big fans of Root and felt like it really did some changes to the war-style games that usually we're not fans of but loved in Root. And in this, I will say it also did some twists on deck building that I really enjoy a lot. I think the idea that those strong cards might not always be in your hand and you have to look at your opponents and you can take from your opponents. Somehow you still have that solo game of just upgrading yourself, but you had to think, what are you giving away at the same time or maybe giving away? You can maybe fool your opponents by putting out like, yeah, I don't want this card anymore, and try to trick them and be like, why do he put it out in his yard? Does he really not want it anymore? So I just felt like that small twist made a big difference.
Yeah, it proves that even with these genres that we've seen over and over again, there's still plenty of room to do new and interesting things with them. I really like that. Also, I think comparing this to Root, I think the art style to me does a similar thing where it's so adorable and welcoming and pleasant, and like kids will like it and look at it and think that looks like fun. And while it does say on the box that they recommend this for players 8 and up, to me I feel like it's almost a little misleading, the same way Root was, where the game can be, maybe it depends on who you play it with, but I feel like it's still fairly deep and complex. It's it's about kids building forts, but there's a lot going on, and you can have a lot of strategies. To me, that's a good thing, and I really like that combo. But I think that's maybe that's a good thing to help people also know before they buy this. Even though it looks like it's a fun, friendly game about building forts, there's more to it than that. It's a lot deeper than I think maybe that art suggests.
I'm just pretty sure at this point that the average 8-year-old is smarter than me.
Maybe that's true. Maybe I'm underestimating the world's 8-year-olds. I don't know. But still, at the end of the day, this is a game that I'm really excited to play more of. I think there's still a lot of different possible strategies, and the way your cards get dealt out to you if you're drafting at the beginning that I haven't explored yet, and I'm really excited. It doesn't take too long to play. Again, it's very small. There's not too many components to keep track of. I'm really ready to just keep on digging into it and playing more and more. So for me, this is a favorite for me so far this year. So I'm excited to experience more games of it.
I'm also guessing you're going to enjoy the fact this will be a lot easier to do to how to play with, because it won't be like just doing 4 different games with routes each faction.
That's another plus. Yeah, that's a good thing too. Let us know if you've had the chance to try Fort. What do you think about it? What strategies have you liked? Which suits or cards are your favorite? Or maybe you have actually played the original game, SPQF. I don't know if there were any major changes between the two versions of the game. Talk to us in that comment section and let us know what you think. We'd like to hear that. Until next time, I'm Jonathan.
I'm Will.
And this is Roll for Crit.
Like this video, subscribe to our channel, and support us on Patreon. That would make us happy.
Maybe the next video is the one where Jonathan does a silly dance.